Welcome to OLR Connections, the podcast of the Ohio Lodge of Research. In this episode of the podcast, Right Worshipful Brother Chad Kopinski, the current master of the Ohio Lodge of Research, takes us through and introduces us to the jurisdictional reports from the Midwest Conference on Masonic Education, which will be the basis of our next virtual discussion on August 27th. So in a nutshell, explain to me, what are the jurisdictional reports?
If I share my screen, will people
Yeah.
see? Okay. Who the Grand Master is. Not every jurisdiction has a theme, but some do.
Mm-hmm.
I'll link to the website, link to Facebook, and then some basic demographics that I think are really helpful for comparison. How many lodges? How many members? What member system are they using? Whether it's Grandview or Maury or Amity or something that's sort of homegrown.
Mm-hmm.
And the communications are, because that also changes things. We have things in October, but you can there's almost an annual communication every year. The big thing that I think people look at is just the idea of ritual. Is it written? Is it ciphered? Is it how is it given to the brethren? Some jurisdictions like Kentucky don't have a standardized ritual. Some have, you can choose one of three. Some are very, prescribed. And then proficiency, because that at the time that we first did this, that's what we were really looking at. And that's how we noticed that this idea of minimum proficiency, we started seeing, oh, that's a trend. And anyway, we wanted to look at how things were structured, because how is education handled at the state level or the district level or the lodge level? Do they have a definition of what education is? Some do, some don't. If they have lodge education officers, and they talk about ritual, just sort of, again, that how do they define education and how is it expressed in their state? From other, this would be like our Royal Schofield Society or the Lodge of Research. We did not include appendant bodies unless for some reason, like the appendant body was doing the education for Blue Lodge. And then we wanted to look at initiatives in general, like what is it that they're trying to do? Is there, what's the name of the initiative and what is it? Here in Ohio, we had those quick sheets, which were really one-page things for LEOs and DEOs. The Lodge Year in a Box that Ohio does, that collection of educational programs you can put together to do a particular year. That actually got a lot of questions. The road shows, Grand Masters Award, because I believe many jurisdictions may have an award system, but it's very different than Ohio. Some reward more for ritual or reward more for different things. The Zerubbabel Engagement Award, this is an initiative in Ohio. It's interesting is that you can look at that and they're very similar programs in about 4 other jurisdictions. The Roadmap for Improvement in Ohio is a very interesting document. In my mind, it's very underutilized, but it's a tool that the education officers are supposed to use that also gives it a lot of interest in the jurisdictions and our Schofield Society. So, what are some of the initiatives that are happening within a state? And then, contacts.
Knowing that the various jurisdictions in the Midwest Conference on Masonic Education vary dramatically in size, approach, characteristics. Have educational tactics been compared, contrasted, and evaluated between the jurisdictions?
It may also be good for us at one point just to kind of stop and talk about the history of these jurisdiction reports. For about 40 years in the conference, what would happen is the different jurisdictions would just kind of stand up and read that report that they would give, for as part of their annual communications. And it was about 3 years ago that we decided to change that, because, well, one, it took up way too long at the conference. And secondly, because we felt, or truthfully, I felt like it didn't answer the questions I wanted answered, which were, give me the jurisdictions, let me know the size, let me know, how they're structured, let me know what they're working on, so that we could, in theory, spread them out on a table like this and look for trends, or um, look for jurisdictions that are doing similar things, or ones that are doing things that are very different. Which all goes back to your original question, which is, this idea of swapping tactics or swapping ideas across jurisdiction, or at least matching, seeing what ideas scale and whatnot. That, to me, is the benefit of the conference, is, that I can sit there and talk to
Mhm.
guys from Michigan or wherever. So, but
Which kind of has to be done in person.
it doesn't have to
I mean,
be.
I mean, it doesn't. I mean, it's much more helpful to sit down with someone and have a conversation, to kind of, because conversations lead you places that you don't anticipate.
That you don't get on a piece of paper. I mean, and
Right.
that's why we designed the sheets the way that we did,
Yeah.
was so that you could walk around the conference and go, well, talk to me about this.
Right.
That's something like, like that kind of um, discussion of tactics being done. Um, the truth is, not until recently, not until we actually started doing these sheets, because what happened was that if I got up and read Ohio's report, you know, people just sort of either zoned out, or they thought to themselves, "Well, that's Ohio," like, that they're so whatever, that they're how do they relate to me? Do you know what I mean? And likewise, if I'm sitting in Ohio, I'm thinking that masonry somewhere is the same as masonry everywhere.
In other words, can the jurisdictions of different sizes learn from one another?
There's actually a story about this, that if you have some place like Ohio that has, again, 424 lodges, 60,000 masons, is there something that we can learn by looking at North Dakota with its 42 lodges and, 2,000 masons? Um, yes, I think, because Ohio has our 25 districts, and each of those districts is just a little bit different, and just, you know, it's likewise, are there things that the smaller districts can get by talking to the bigger districts? I think so, but also recognizing that, again, some ideas are scalable, some aren't. Um, this last conference we went to in Minnesota, we're kind of getting off topic here, but I think it's at least something
No, I think it's useful. Yeah.
To think about, is I was talking to the ed chair from North Dakota, and again, this led me to a whole boatload of questions, because there's a lot going on here, and I think this is something that, well, let's tell a couple stories, because there's things here I think that people could really look into. Um, Years ago in North Dakota, their Grand Lodge sort of, for lack of a better word, kind of washed their hands of the individual lodges. You know how lodges sometimes tend to be a little crabby and say, "Wow, Grand Lodge needs to get off our back, needs to leave us alone." Their Grand Lodge essentially said, "Okay, sounds great. See ya." I'm paraphrasing, and but then for the better part of maybe a decade, that was how things happened. But now their Grand Lodge is saying, "Well, this just isn't working," right? Because now our lodges are Um, our individual lodges don't have enough members to open, or they don't have enough guys who are learning ritual, or we don't have enough leaders. There's an education. I mean, um, so now what are we going to do? And for our Ohio friends who are listening to this, please realize that the idea of a yearly inspection in the ritual, that does not happen uh, nationwide. In fact, Ohio is one of the few jurisdictions that requires its lodges to have an in-person inspection by the members of that lodge every single year. Um, and you can trace that back to that study that we looked at last month in terms of anyway, proficiencies. So their Grand Lodge officers were trying to reconnect with the lodge, with the lodges North Dakota, and the lodges didn't really want to have anything to do with Grand Lodge. The idea being, you weren't there when we needed you. Why do we need you now? So we were talking about, well, what do you do? How do you reestablish those connections um, with the lodges? And he and I sat there and spoke for a good like 35, 40 minutes. And I'll be honest, it kind of boggled my mind. I'm thinking, I have I have an idea, and I can tell you what we talked about. But as he was telling me about these problems, I'm thinking, I don't. How would you even start? Where would you even start with something like that? Um, and he's doing something that I thought was absolutely brilliant, which is that he and the other Grand Lodge officers is they are just making a point to go and visit every lodge, not with a purpose, not with a like, we're coming here to take your charter or inspect your books. It's just, you're just going to come to a meeting and just start, that one brother, one moment, one meaningful connection at
Mhm.
a time. And that's how they're going to do it. And I thought that is absolutely the way to start.
So I'm imagining one of the challenges to these reports, whether they were given verbally or written or so forth, is that you have the same people looking at them every time.
Yes.
And as we all know, when you're doing any form of research or answering any questions, fresh eyes are always good. So I am speculating that that is what you are proposing for our virtual discussion, is that we get some fresh eyes on these things.
The other thing that comes out of that is in our previous, in-person meeting, we looked at that presentation from the um, a presentation from the Conference of Grand Masters from years ago. That really was it was the study that really inspired changes in proficiency. It inspired one-day classes. It really inspired changes in the way that we do things, um, with a focus more on member acquisition as opposed to retention. And that was 30 years ago. And if that's where we started, kind of looking at where some of these jurisdictions are now, are there through lines there we can see? Are there things that kind of make you think, well, I wonder if that is inspired, if there's a correlation or a causation between what we looked at last month and what we're sort of looking at here. Getting them to recognize that it's those questions, and not being satisfied with, I don't know, or knowing where to go to get that answer, or be able to talk to somebody and say, could you just talk to me about this? um, it's amazing what you find when you reach out your hand, and you make those meaningful connections. It's amazing what you can learn once you step outside your front door. um, I also think what may happen here, especially coming after our conversation last month where we looked at that big study, is I think the people in Logic Research will see some of the things that I saw. They'll see some things like, oh, I wonder if this, was inspired by this. Um, and we can look at how you might potentially prove that, or at least give some evidence to this. The truth is, research is more than just history. research is more than just, regurgitating other people's research. There's so many different ways to look at masonry. And, it's okay to have a perspective. It's okay to have a view of your own. And this is a way that we can all together come and sort of share what we see, what we find, and, help each other see things differently.
Nice. So we have our next virtual discussion for the Ohio Lodge of Research scheduled on August 27th, which I believe is a Tuesday night. So what specifically are you proposing or asking the members to do for the 27th?
I think we'll post the jurisdiction reports on our website, or at least we'll post a link to them. What I would like the brethren to look at, especially, I think there's three questions they could potentially look at. First is, I think they could look at just the demographics and the numbers. Like what are the sizes? What are the lodges? Number of lodges, number of members. And for those who like to crunch numbers, what does that mean in terms of average number of Masons or percentage of population? I mean, there's ways that you can crunch those numbers and see, at one point, 1 out of every 10 men of appropriate age in Ohio was a Mason. Does that still ring true? I think the second question people can look at would be things like proficiencies. When they look at that, are they seeing differences, trends? Are they seeing, how do different jurisdictions handle things like proficiencies? And the third question I think people could look at is the different initiatives that that jurisdictions have, because really what those initiatives are is they typically fall into one of a couple of buckets. Either it's solving a problem in a lodge, it's informing brethren, or it's rewarding brethren. Now, I just put that out there as sort of my thoughts. My guess is that they look at the initiatives, they may find other ways to categorize them. But I would say look at the initiatives and see if you're noticing again, are there trends? Are there aims to these things? And we can start looking again at trends. We can look at comparison and contrast, and we can start again generating research questions. Why does this happen? How does this relate to this? So again, going with that idea of put enough cool people in a room and something cool will happen. I mean, we have a chest of jewels here. Let's get the guys around here. Let's look at them and see what they might find and see where they might lead us. And it may lead us nowhere, but knowing the guys at the Lodge of Research, I don't foresee that happening. There are so many questions that happen here because of the fact that, I mean, defining research, defining education, defining what success is. And there's so many questions here. And the unfortunate thing is that there's no necessarily one perfect answer. There's an answer that is always shifting. And so when you write the biography of, John Shearer, dude was born, dude lived, dude died. There's a page count there, like there's a page count. When you're looking at these sorts of things, there's no page count. And as soon as you think you have one, guess what? Somebody changes the assignment, which makes it, to my mind, really exciting.
Mm-hmm.
But can also be really daunting and frustrating. But
well, and I think to the potential final question that I posed, the beauty of that is to your point, there is no one answer,
no.
right? someone in the second district may come up with an answer and say, this initiative that we saw in Michigan, absolutely, we have to do this. This is going to be perfect. And someone in the, I don't know, 25th district may say, there's no way in the world that's ever going to work over here.
Right.
But this initiative that we saw in North Dakota, now that one's something we need. And so there are going to be, even in his best case scenario, there are going to be multiple paths.
As well, there should be. I mean, that's
Yes.
because as well there should be. But getting us out of our bubbles and getting us away from thinking again, masonry somewhere is masonry everywhere is huge. And I mean, you've gone to the conference. I mean, and I always joke about meaningful connections, but the truth is, yeah, I mean, you sit there and you talk to people and getting out of the bubble and starting the conversation. It's amazing what you find out. It's amazing what questions you find that kind of take you towards why, but also you kind of start looking at, well, there's some interesting ideas out there that we can, beg, borrow, and steal. Sometimes, yeah. So I think it'll be an interesting conversation.
Excellent. So the title of this discussion is Getting Out of Your Bubble.
Or,
bursting the bubble.
Yeah. I mean, bursting the bubble is I think great because, yeah. Or whether it's expanding your horizons or whatever, but just getting out of that mindset that your experience of masonry is the same as everybody else's. Because, this will be the fourth time I've said it, but, if the more you connect and the more those meaningful connections happen, it's amazing just what you see that happens out there. So.